Hi, it's me, uh, back with another Uptie 4 guide for Limbus Company. In the last one, I went over all the IDs. This one, I am going to go over all of the Ego. The Ego, I would say, just as a baseline, you're probably not uptying your Ego until you have the IDs that you want uptied, because first off, uptying Ego costs a lot more Ego shards, like double the amount IDs will cost usually. And usually the base, which is the ID, is going to be more helpful. Here is the tier list up front, if you don't want to watch the entire video, because it's going to be a little long, probably not as long as the last one. Big winners here. A lot of the Ego that were already good are getting a lot better, as you can see. There's a couple outliers in there. Rhymeshank I wouldn't have called the best Ego ever, but it is certainly getting a big buff. And both Red Eyes don't really need the buff, but they get a pretty good buff, is the most significant thing to say. Most of these, though, are not gaining very much significant changes-wise. They're just gaining more of what they already do. The ones at the top row are the exception in this case. I'm going to put a disclaimer here as well. I don't have Red Eyes Closed or Lifetime Stew for Sinclair uptied to 3, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to show them in the video, but I know what their upties do, so I'll be able to tell you. And that will hopefully inform you enough. I'm sorry about that, but I just don't have enough thread to spare to uptie stuff that I wasn't already using or didn't already like. So I'm sorry, but that's just the way it goes. So, going into them more directly, starting with Yisang. One thing you're going to notice pretty quickly is most of the base Ego are not worth uptying, or thread spinning, sorry. They're called something different for Ego, I forgot. They're probably not worth it. For example, Crow's Eye View just inflicts 2 bind next turn on hit, and that's all that it changes. It is not worth 80 shards and 110 thread for that effect. If it gained a significant amount of power, maybe, but this is one that gains no meaningful upgrades. Don't bother uptying it, or thread spinning it. Fourth match, Flame. It's thread spin. First off, I want to complain, it still doesn't gain any power when uptied, which is annoying. It inflicts a lot more burn, and gains 2 more target slots in both of its variants. This is significant. This Ego is probably not worth uptying because Yisang still doesn't have a good Ego, a good ID to fuel it. And so probably pass on this one, in my opinion. It's just not worth it, is all. Wishing Cairn is in the same boat. It gains 2 attack weight on its base, and the non-base actually gains a bunch of base power. I think that's 5 base power. This is really good. The fact that it becomes an AoE is really good. Unfortunately, it clashes with Sun Shower, which, as you'll see in a second, is way better to thread spin. And as a result, probably thread spin this when you're out of other things to uptie or thread spin, just because it's a little resource intensive and you're probably not going to want to use this often. It becoming an AoE is cool, though. Dimension Shredder basically doesn't change. The before attack effect is highlighted yellow, but it actually isn't any different on either of them. And it inflicts, I think that's 2 more Dimensional Rift. It's not worth it. This Ego is already pretty strong, and 2 more Rupture Count isn't significant enough to be wanting to uptie it when Rupture Count already isn't that great. Do not uptie this one. It gains nothing meaningful from it. Save your resources. Sun Shower, though, is the first one where thread spinning is significant. First off, both versions gain power in some way. Both gain 5 coin power, and, well, is that 5 on the corrosion? It's actually worse on the corrosion, technically. This is changed so that it has the same minimum, but it gains 5 power overall on both. And the real significant thing is they gain 2 more slots to target. So these are our 7-target Ego. There are 3 of these in the game. We'll get to both of the other ones. This is the one that I would say, guaranteed, you're going to want to uptie this, because it's his best Ego already, and it is gaining quite a lot from the Threadspin. So once you have a Yisang that you like that's uptied, probably Ego Yisang, to be fair, you'll probably want to Threadspin this. On to Faust. Faust has always had some of the better Ego. Representation Emitter does not gain anything meaningful. It's just 2 more SP for low SP allies, and that means it is not worth it. Simple as that. Hexnail is one of the more interesting ones. It inflicts nails now, which is really cool, and deals additional damage if the target has Curse. If you're building an Envy team, you're going to be able to use this multiple times, and so it's going to deal a lot of damage. The Corrosion gains the same thing. It's still attack weight 1, but I think this is one of the Ego that gains the most from being Threadspun up to 4. So if you like Hexnail, or you like Ncorp, definitely uptie this. Telepole I'm going to talk about first, even though Fluid Sac came out first. Telepole gains more charge and becomes AoE. This means that it is decent now. I always thought this was one of the worst IDs, or the worst Ego in the game. Now it does more. It becomes a lot better. You're still probably not going to want to uptie it because it conflicts with Fluid Sac. Fluid Sac, that is Hexnail. Fluid Sac doesn't gain any attack weight. What it does gain is it heals 10 more SP if you landed heads for all allies. This is very significant. It's not a major upgrade, but it is enough of an upgrade for Fluid Sac to be worth Threadspinning. Literally the only way that this wouldn't have been worth Threadspinning is if it literally gained nothing. But as is, it just does what it already does better. The attack power down is already here. This is not a new effect. And 10 SP damage doesn't really matter. You're probably not using the Corrosion anyways. But yeah, really good choice for uptie. Don Quixote. Le Sangre de Sancho gains 3 coin power and inflicts 2 more bleed. Probably not worth it. It does reach 26. 24 was the big breakpoint that it didn't hit. It was the only base Ego that didn't hit that. This makes it hit that. But unfortunately, the passive got changed. So this is a bit of a worse Ego overall. Not enough meaningful stuff on it. Don't bother Threadspinning it. Lifetime Stew becomes AoE. And this is significant because it means that you have AoE burn count infliction, which is something we didn't have before. That being said, the passive really holds this thing back. This is an ID where it gains some decent upgrades, but I wouldn't prioritize it unless you really like Lifetime Stew. In which case, yeah, go ahead. It's pretty good overall. It's just the passive that hurts it. It's a good damage dealing Ego. Telepole, we all know Telepole is great. It becomes AoE. This is worth investing in. I wouldn't say the upgrades it gets are major. This effect hurts a lot. The Rupture will guarantee the next hit you take is 10. You can technically bypass the Fragile because it's current turn Fragile. But down tends to be pretty fast, so this is risky. The normal version of the attack, aside from becoming AoE, technically doesn't change. It's still a really good Ego. And if you use W Dawn, you're going to want to uptie this, probably. Yeah, AoEs is always better. So, sure. Dawn's Fluid Sac inflicts 2 sinking and becomes AoE. I don't know what this sinking is here for. It is not relevant. The only thing this is relevant for is becoming AoE. This is a lot for an AoE. but still probably not worth uptying before other things, in my opinion. Sorry about the yawning. It is 11:30. I have been awake a long time today. I had to... This is the same day that I joined Care for his 7-hour ranking stream, for those who wanted to know. So yeah, Don's best one is Telepole. I would say probably don't Threadspin any of it until you have everything else uptied and Threadspun that you want. Ryoshu, Forest for the Flames, inflicts 1 more fragile on hit. This is pretty significant. It also gains some coin power. This is one of the only 2 base ego where I say it's worth putting an investment into it. I wouldn't say any of the upgrades are major, but it gains a significant amount of power, and more fragile never hurts. So, yeah, overall, pretty solid uptie in this case, which is not common on the base ego. Again, I can't show you what Red Eyes does. Basically, in addition to all the stuff it has on Uptie 3, mainly the slash fragility stuff is the most important thing to note, it becomes AoE. I believe it becomes 3 target. Being able to inflict slash fragility on multiple targets at the same time is very, very nice. And this is one of the ego that definitely wins the most out of all of them as a result of that. Red Eyes is definitely one of the better ego to Threadspin just in general. I cannot say the same about Red Eyes Open, because unfortunately it just gains power and damage. The actual effectiveness of this has not changed. It already rolled high enough. Getting to 33 instead of 30... Sorry, 37 instead of 34, my bad, is not significant in any capacity. Like, you don't break any thresholds with that, and 20% more damage is nice, but it's not really necessary. Same goes for the Corrosion. A potential 43 just doesn't matter in terms of its effectiveness. It's still good to uptie. The power is nice. I just wouldn't prioritize it. It's still worth investing in, I think. 4th Match Flame got a very big buff. First off, it becomes AoE, which by itself is really good. And secondly, deals 5% more damage for every burn on the target. And an additional attack power up per kill, I believe. No, that's the same, my bad. AoE makes this good anyways. This is one of the best rolling ego in the game already. It becoming AoE, it did not need that. And the increased damage against burning targets is absurd. You already run Chef Ryoshu in burn comp. And so having this at max uptie is just fantastic. Definitely one of the big winners in terms of ego getting Threadspuns. 100% recommend. Meursault. Chains of Others inflicts 1 less bind and attack power down on himself. It's not enough to be significant. Sorry if you like this ID. Or sorry if you like this ego, rather. I'm going to make that mistake a lot today, apparently. It's just not worth it. Keep it at Uptie 3. Screw Loose Wallop is another one like that. It gains 1 attack weight on both versions of the attack. Usually, this is not targeting any more units. The problem with 2 attack weight skills is that usually most enemies have 2 skill slots, so it's still just going to hit 1 guy. The changes on this one aren't significant enough for it to be worth uptying to 4. The surgery is really what you want from this ego, and it already gains that at 3, so don't bother. Pursuance has always been really good. Basically, the only thing the Threadspin does is make the base version of the attack AoE. The Corrosion literally doesn't change. But base Pursuance being AoE is really nice. It's worth investing in if you like Meursault, and he's definitely gotten a lot better. Unfortunately, his best IDs to fuel this are both pretty bad still, but I like it. I like the change to this one. I wish the corrosion got literally anything, but it was still pretty good already, so not much to note there. Meursault's Capote gains 10 coin power. I don't know why this happened, but as a fan of Capote, I'm not going to complain. Inflicts more burn on all enemies, and inflicts more burn count if the burst staggers. That is very significant. Like, this is a really good ego. Already was, because it's super easy to fuel, and giving it 10 coin power, definitely not necessary, just makes it better. The corrosion doesn't gain any coin power, but does become AoE. It inflicts a lot of burn. Inflicts a lot of burn on everybody, in fact, and also inflicts a lot more burn count if it bursts Tremor. So I would say, I think this is somewhere between prioritizing and not. It entirely depends on if you like running Meursault. He definitely has some good ego now, and definitely has, some good IDs now, with Uptie 4 being introduced. I would say this is a really solid ego. Personally, I don't think it's enough to be worth counting as major upgrades, because it is just more of the same, but it is a lot, and I could see the argument for this being one of the ego that you're always going to Threadspin as a result, up to 4. Honglu. His base ego, unfortunately, does not gain anything meaningful. This is, you lose less SP when you lose SP from effects. It's not significant. I'm sorry. Don't bother uptying it. Roseate Desire becomes AoE, and that is significant, and inflicts a little bit more defense level down, but I would still prioritize other things before this. It's a good ego, but it's not worth Threadspinning at the moment. Maybe if he gets some better IDs that fuel it, but right now Ting Tang doesn't need this. So just do it if you want it. And Dimension Shredder becomes AoE, but I think this is one of the only thing that gains 2 attack weight that really isn't worth it. And that's just because it's still only 1 fragile, really. I would say this isn't significant enough to be worth uptying, personally. You might disagree with that, but I don't really like this ego. It's super expensive sanity-wise, and just really isn't that good. Sorry, Honglu. I like you, bud, but it's just not worth it. Oops. I don't know why I'm looking at him. Body Sack. This is one of the ones where it's definitely worth investing in. 2 more attack power-up is very significant. It's not a major buff, especially since Body Sack got nerfed pretty hard with its passive, but it is enough to be worth investing in, and that's what's important. It is the other base ego that I would recommend uptying if you really want to uptie something ego-wise. AEDD. It becomes AoE on Threadspin. The base version does, anyways. This is a redundant effect, and this was already here. So the corrosion actually just doesn't change at all. And this is something that I hope changes, because this is really weird how they have to add this. Because it already spends all your charge from the on-hit effect. That being said, base AEDD becoming an AoE is significant because there are Heathcliffs that are fast enough where this paralysis and gloom fragility matters. This is one of the ones I would say that if you want to upgrade it, probably don't prioritize it over Body Sack. Still get Body Sack first. And that's all I can really say about this one. Telepole doesn't gain anything significant. It can spend more charge to gain more max power, to gain more skill power. But it doesn't need that. as well as this telepole being the highest rolling skill in the game, doesn't need 5 more skill power. It just doesn't. I wouldn't say this one's worth up thread spinning, personally. It just doesn't gain anything significant from it, and spending more charge is actually something Heathcliff doesn't necessarily want. So, on to Ishmael. Snag Harpoon, Burst Tremor. This is not a significant upgrade. Don't thread spin this. Capote, I'm going to talk about first, because I think it's cool. First off, 1 attack weight, maybe not what it needed. It's still useful if you like Wrath compositions, which I do. I wouldn't prioritize this over any of Ishmael's IDs, though, because she has a lot of good IDs to Uptie to 4. The Corrosion gains 3 attack weight. It's one of the only 4 targets in the game. That's all it does, but this being AoE is pretty significant. If you like corrosions, it's a pretty cheap corrosion, which is the real significant part. It's one of the only ones that you can consistently use. And it being AoE is really, really nice. That being said, I still wouldn't prioritize this. Prioritize Ishmael's identities. Definitely. Roseate Desire has always been pretty good for speed control, and it inflicts a lot more offense level down. It inflicts more paralysis and bind on both variations of it. I'm going to say right now, I don't think this is worth uptying to 4. Everything that it does at Uptie 4 is already done at Uptie 3. And none of Ishmael's IDs are fast enough to really take full advantage of the paralysis of the offense level down. So I wouldn't say this one's worth it necessarily, unless you really, really like it. Ardor Blossom Star is one of the big winners ego-wise, because it becomes AoE. Normally this isn't that important, but like with 4th Match Flame, this was already insanely powerful, and does not need AoE. It also inflicts more burn, which it didn't need. The Corrosion becomes a 5 target, and inflicts the same amount of burn, it's just after attack instead of on hit now. This becoming 3 target is already enough to make it an S tier ego. This is one of the 6 ego in the game where Threadspinning it up to 4 significantly improves its effectiveness, and I would always recommend it. I still would say get her IDs uptied first. Specifically, if you want to use this one, her Liu ID really helps this a lot. Next, we have Rodion. I keep doing that. I'm very tired. I apologize. What is cast? Threadspin is not significant. Sorry. This is a pretty popular theme with the base ego. Unfortunately, I wish some of them had become better, but oh well. I'm actually going to talk about 4th Match Flame first. This one becomes AoE, and the Corrosion becomes more AoE, and that's its only bonuses. And this would definitely be a lot more worth it if this were a positive coin skill instead. If this was a 20 plus 18, this would be so much better. As it is now, this one gains decent upgrades, but I probably wouldn't prioritize it. Because while I like Wrath Fragility teams, it's really not changing much about the skill. Rhymeshank is one of the big winners, in my opinion. First off, 5 sinking and 5 sinking count on everybody that gets hit. That is a lot. But, first off, the Corrosion actually becomes AoE, which it should have been to begin with, I think. But also, inflicts 10 sinking and 8 sinking count, which is just so much sinking. This is the single most consistent inflictor of sinking in the entire game, as a result. It is a little expensive. To use the Corrosion yourself, you need 7 Gloom and No. 8 Gloom and 5 Envy in order for it not to target allies. But that is a very, very big buff on the Corrosion. And it's a pretty big buff on the Awakening too, just inflicting Sinking as well as Count. So I honestly think this is one of the Ego that you would prioritize, especially since it's built by one of Rodio's best IDs, being her Rosespanner one. Definitely can't say anything bad about it. Sinclair. Branch of Knowledge does not gain enough for it to be worth uptying. I'm sorry. 1 attack power-up is nice, but like, whatever, you know? Impending Day is not worth Threadspinning. I still really like this Ego, but it did not gain AoE. It just gains a little bit of damage on both versions, and as a result, isn't worth it. So don't spend it on this. Lifetime Stew is the other one that I can't show. But this is the only Ego in the game that I really don't know where to put it. Before Uptie 4, this Ego is just bad. I'll just come out and say it. With Threadspinning it up to level 4, this goes from an attack weight 3 to an attack weight 7. That is a big enough change in how many targets are being hit that it's significant to know. Like, I can't realistically call a 7-target Ego bad. I would probably say it's still not amazing, but it's definitely not terrible anymore, because you're guaranteed to hit some enemies with it, and also guaranteed to hit some allies to boost them. Whereas before, you would only really hit your allies, and Ego Resource Amp is really cool. I'm not going to deny that, but it's just not that helpful most of the time. The Corrosion? Sorry, the Corrosion, I believe, goes to a 5-target AoE, and gets a bigger damage bonus, a bigger damage bonus from spending Ego resources, if I remember correctly. But honestly, I think that the Awakening might honestly be better, finally. I don't know where to put this on the tier list. It entirely depends on if you like Lifetime Stew enough to use it. And I know that there's a lot of people that do. So if you're one of those people, I might honestly recommend prioritizing this as an uptie for Ego. I still think it's probably better to uptie all of your other IDs first, and maybe some of the Ego on the other IDs too. But if you like this Ego already, this has not only become not bad, I don't want to call it good. Do I have to call it good? At Threadspin 4? I know there's a lot of people that like it. I think I'll wait until I actually have a chance to use it to call it anything better than average. But your opinion in this case will definitely vary, because it is the only one where I really didn't know where to put it. I just knew I wasn't putting it in the very bottom in the priority list, is all I'll say. Outis, now. 2 Pathos Mathos gains 1 attack power up next turn if it kills. That is not enough to be worth it. Put simply. Sun Shower. Sun Shower is really good. It gains a little bit more on everything that it does, and gains 1 additional target slot. Whether you want to uptie this is going to be completely up to you. I put it in worth investing in without major upgrades, because honestly, 1 more attack weight is not that major. Most of the time, you're still only going to hit 1 target with this, so whatever. And the Corrosion is still bad, let's be real. But this is still one of the best Teth Egos in the game. It's super easy to fuel, and it does some very good things for a very good ID. So definitely worth investing in. Yasunyata. This is significant. All it gains is 1 attack weight. which wouldn't normally be significant, except this inflicts fragility. In normal fights, this means nothing. I still think this is a good ego, but it's not worth investing in for normal fights. In boss fights specifically, this is an ego that you can specifically target one slot that only has one piece for the part, and you'll be able to inflict less fragility on 2 parts now. And that matters a lot. I will still say don't prioritize this. It is one of my favorite ego aesthetically, and I like to use it, but I can't justify prioritizing it over any of Outis's other ego except her base. But your mileage may vary in this case. It is significant, and honestly, the Uptie 3 is pretty good. So, yeah. Ebony Stem has exactly one change in that it's the third 7 target. The other 2 being Lifetime Stew and Yisang's Sun Shower. I cannot say anything bad about that. It's not a major upgrade, but it is enough to be worth investing in, because Ebony Stem has always been pretty good. A little hard to feel, but pretty good. And it just hitting more is never a bad thing. So that's all I really have to say about that one. And lastly, we have Greg. Suddenly one day, gains +4 to its infliction of a status effect. This is not worth it because of its randomness. Legerdemain. It gains more tremor, and paralysis is on hit instead of on heads hit. But the more significant thing is that the corrosion inflicts more maggots, actually. It's still probably not worth prioritizing. It's like really okay, and Legerdemain is still super easy to fuel. G-Corp Greg is never dropping out of A tier, we'll put him in now, because of this ego, and that hasn't changed. But I wouldn't prioritize upgrading it past 3. Lantern, on Threadspin, gains 2 attack weight on both of its variants, and that's the only change. This is actually significant, because it gives Greg an access to an easy Pierce AoE, and it actually improves the healing too, because it's on hit instead of after attack. I think that's an oversight and will change. But until it does, this is basically a guaranteed full heal when you use it. So if you're on low HP, this is cool. I'm not going to say prioritize this, but it's a decent enough upgrade to make it worthwhile if you want it. And lastly, we have probably my least favorite ego in the game, now that Lifetime Stew is actually good at Threadspin 4. Good in quotations, average, I should say. The Threadspin for this makes it inflict more spark discharge and gain more charge, and the corrosion becomes AoE. That being said, all disdain for this ego aside, I don't think it's enough to make it worth using. If you're running Rose Spanner Greg, he fuels this, obviously, and gaining 10 charge is nice. I just personally don't consider it worth it. I'm guessing Greg, once Rhino Greg comes out, because we know that's an ID that's happening, I think this ego will become much better. But until then, it's just kind of meh at any Uptie. I'm sorry if you like this, but I don't, and I don't think it's worth prioritizing this over anything else. Like, there's a ton of ego that I would put over this, and every single ID that isn't worthless at Uptie 4. So that's all of it. Big winners, again, I'm going to flash the tier list on screen again. Sun Shower for Yisang, Hexnail for Faust. Hexnail being the one that's more interesting than it is good, but the ego was already really good. Fourth Match Flame and Ardor Blossom Star because they do so much damage and become AoE. Red Eyes because it helps your damage a lot and becomes AoE. And Rhyme Shank because it becomes the best inflictor of sinking count in the game. The other ones, Fluid Sac, Telepole, Red Eyes Open, all that stuff was already really good and just becomes better. Sinclair's Lifetime Stew is still the only one that I'm really not sure where to put it. I definitely see it being more useful now. I still don't really like how it works, but if you like it, you're eating good tonight. That's some good soup. The rest of them, probably don't worry about it. Your IDs are going to take priority over all of it. And all the ones at the bottom there, until they get an ID that they specifically support, in the case of AEDD, none of these... Oh, and I guess Dimension Shredder for Honglu, too. If he ever gets a charge ID, that's going to be a lot better, too. I should mention that. None of those really matter until that happens, so that's why they're down there. And that's about all I have to say about the Ego. So thank you for watching. I hope you found this helpful. I'm going to clarify, I'm not the end-all be-all opinion for this game. I do generally know what's good and bad, but I also will say, use what you like. That's always the most important thing in this game. I hope you like and subscribe the video, because it helps me out a lot, and I hope to see you back again soon. Bye!